You're taking a look inside Kansas politics. Welcome in. I'm Rebecca Chung.
And I'm Rob Hughes. And we start this morning with the war on trade. Now, President Trump's tariffs making waves across the world. A 90-day pause now put in place for some trading partners.
But what do Kansas lawmakers think about these changes? I spoke with U.S. Representative Tracy Mann about that, federal cuts, and a massive package with all things tax cuts, border security, and more. Congressman Mann, the House is expected to vote or has voted, right, on the reconciliation package. Where do things stand on that? And what do you see that accomplishing?
So had the votes this week. That process continues. This is the one big beautiful bill that really includes the president's main priorities that he ran on, that he won an electoral college landslide. Things like border security. A lot of things he can do as the president, but a lot of things that still need to be done. Also things like making sure that Kansas don't receive a tax increase, so a tax will be included. And also returning to American energy dominance. What do we need to do to make sure that our energy industry is growing and thriving, not just in Kansas, but around the country? So all those things are included in this big reconciliation bill that continues to work its way through Congress.
What do you think are the key parts that would help Kansas constituents, or how does that factor in?
Sure, a lot of things are included in this bill. It's a very large bill, certainly preventing tax increases. You know, if Congress does not act, every Kansan has an increase in their individual income tax come January 1. Corporate tax rates go up, dividend tax, capital gains tax goes up. So making sure that doesn't happen is really important. But also all the border security provisions as well, which was the number one issue in the last election. Credit President Trump for everything that he has done and continues to do on the border.
You also mentioned the SAVE Act. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so realize where we're at. So under President Biden, 16 million people came to the country illegally. Credit President Trump, just 80 days into office, he has gotten the border way under control. We go from record high border crossing to record low. Biden said for years that we needed Congress to act. Turns out we need a different president in the White House. But Congress still needs to do some things. But then part of that is the SAVE Act, which makes sure that only United States citizens are able to vote in our elections. Common sense. Kansas broadly support it. Was pleased to vote for it earlier this week.
Let's also talk about federal cuts, because we've seen a lot of those to various agencies. It has impacted Kansas. I think one of the most recent ones is child care licensing fees being reinstated for the state. So we don't know how that would affect child care facilities. But let me ask a little bit here. What do you think are the main federal cuts that would help people, or are you for them? What is your stance on this?
A lot of things. So my stance, big picture, we're $36 trillion in debt. And we've added $23 trillion in the last 15 years. We have got to figure out ways to find savings in the government. There's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that needs to be stamped out. So that's what we need to look at. First, additionally, those are a lot of areas of the federal government that are doing things that are way beyond their purview. I think the more things that the states are doing, I think Topeka, certainly counties are better able to spend funds than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
But then at the same time, we're also dealing with budget issues here. Even though, revenue seems to be ticking up, there is still some restraints that we have, especially with some of the cuts that we're looking at the Capitol. So where's the balance?
Sure. Well, the big difference is, in the Capitol, states have to balance their budget. The federal government does not. So now we have a $36 trillion debt, which is more than $100,000 per person. This year we will take in about $4.5 trillion, but federally we'll spend $6.5 trillion. So we've got to find a way to reduce the size of the federal government, because we're racking up this debt that's going to impact us, impact our kids as well. Realize we spend over $1 trillion just on interest on the federal debt. Our spending levels just aren't sustainable.
What about services for rural districts with cuts to agriculture?
Yeah, we've not seen any cuts to agriculture so far. Don't anticipate that to be the case. Crop insurance is one of the main programs that our producers rely on. That has not been cut. I've not been in any meeting where that's talked about being cut. A lot of the cuts at USDA have been in the bureaucracy. It's one of the bigger agencies, but I've not heard of or seen any cuts that's actually impacting farmers on the day-to-day.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about tariffs. Once again, a very hot topic, especially when it comes to China, Mexico. So what's your stance on the current direction of U.S. trade policy?
Sure, President Trump's a negotiator, and he's brought all these countries to the table to renegotiate our trade deals. And you look specifically for agriculture, we have a negative trade balance. We ought to be exporting more ag products than we're importing. We get into it and realize there's a lot of countries that have taken advantage of us. We've got to start putting America first. So the renegotiating of our trade relationships, that's moving forward. For example, Germany, we are not able to sell our cars to Germany yet. Germany's able to sell their cars here. That's not fair. So let's level the playing field. The president is renegotiating our trade relationship with countries. That's going to be a good thing for the country in the long term.
Okay. You don't think that this could potentially raise the prices that consumers see, though? That's something that economists have been warning about.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, Trump has put a pause on the majority of tariffs. Now, China, who has not come to the table, those tariffs continue. But at the end of the day, we have to have a level playing field. And if we have a level playing field, I think that our country, you know, our ag producers, for example, can compete with anyone in the world. But when we have these trade barriers, when we're not able to sell our ag products to Europe, for example, it makes no sense. We've got to do something about it to get to a better place for the long term.
Back to touching on ag, because I do believe that there were some talks of cutting agriculture departments. Are you saying that there's no, like, cutting from programs that would hurt farmers? We did see some programs that, like, would have those cuts, no?
No, I don't believe so. You know, so the things that are in agriculture, so when you look at the Farm Bill, 81% of the dollars for a Farm Bill that USDA is doing is food nutrition programs. 19% is everything else, things like crop insurance, things that producers rely on. I'm not aware of any cuts that have been made to those programs, you know, that impacts producers on the day-to-day.
What about aid programs that would provide relief to farmers? Was this the one that you were trying to save at some point? Yeah,
so you know, it doesn't impact farmers directly, but indirectly. So there's a program called Food for Peace, where we're sending American-grown commodities overseas to mouths that need those calories. Good for ag producers, good for our shippers, good for the mouths that receive them. That was something that USAID was administering, and I believe strongly that USDA ought to be the one that administers that program. So we introduced legislation that would move Food for Peace to the USDA, which would be a good thing for the program in the long term.
What are you hearing on the Hill about these federal cuts and tariffs? Because I know Senator Moran has come out and is one of the legislators that has talked about pushing back a bit and giving maybe Congress some authority over signing off on some of these tariffs that President Trump has pushed for.
Yeah, I think we need to give the president room to negotiate. He's a negotiator through and through. And here, right away, we've got 70 countries that are coming to the table saying they want to negotiate fair deals with the United States. That's a good thing. We've got to give him the space to be able to do what he does best. Everyone knows that President Trump's a negotiator, and we need to give him the ability, make sure he continues to have the ability to negotiate the best possible deal. So
even in the short term, if we do see price hikes from these tariffs in some fashion, do you think in the long term, President Trump's tariffs would pay off?
Yeah, in the long term, if we have better, fair trade deals, we're going to see our exports skyrocket. And that's where we really got to get to. We got to be at a spot where we're able to export to countries, like our ag products, for example, to Europe. You know, right now we can't send corn to Mexico because we grow genetically modified corn. It makes absolutely no sense. So these trade barriers need to come down. We need to have a level playing field so that we can compete on the world stage.
When we come back, our exclusive interview with the new candidate for Secretary of State.
Yeah, we'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Got kids? Then you've got chaos. We at Polito Closets have the answer. Our customized Polito Kids Closets are designed so every single little thing has its own space. Locally owned and operated. Polito Closets. Life tidied up.
As soon as I called Devon James, Dustin was very empathetic, helpful in the situation, told me that he was happy we called and that he would handle everything from there. What makes Devon James different is they take particular care in each person's case. They understand that there's unique needs to each person. Sometimes that they need extra care, they need a little more empathy and encouragement, but overall they know that everything's taken care of and in their hands. You should call Devon James because they make it perfectly simple and easy.
At Prairie Band Casino, there are many ways to play your way. Pull up a chair, play it cool, and take your game to new heights.
Enter the Keys to Luxury BMW giveaway for your chance to ride in style in a new BMW X1.
Discover more ways to play your way.
The people that I represent have had serious injuries or deaths in the family.
Being able to be there for someone and have that feeling of providing for them.
Being able to help them through that process and relieve some of the stress that comes from that kind of uncertainty.
Finding the truth for my clients and solving their problems.
I became a lawyer to make a difference in people's lives and getting my clients there and getting them compensation and letting them know that there's somebody there fighting for them. It's really rewarding.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. We're back now with the first candidate to announce their run for Kansas Secretary of State.
It's a story we first broke on 27 News. I sat down with Kansas House Elections Chair Pat Proctor for his first exclusive interview to talk about his top priorities and why he says the January 6th riot in D.C. is one of the reasons he's running. Okay, so Representative Proctor, I wanted to start by asking, why are you running?
You know, when I first came to the legislature, they put me on the elections committee, and I was like, why'd they put me on the elections committee? So I went to the Secretary of State's office, and I spent the whole day with the elections team there, and they just kind of filled my head with everything from A to Z about elections. And the whole time I was in there, my phone was blowing up, and I'm like, you know, I'm obviously not going to be rude. They're taking their time for me, so I didn't check my phone. When I walked out of the Secretary of State's office, I looked down at my phone, and the day I was there was January 6, 2021. And everything that had happened in January 26 was in my phone. And it really just impressed upon me how vital to our form of government and our way of life that not only that our elections are secure, but that people know they're secure, that voters have the confidence that the results of the election reflect their will. And you know, I really became passionate about it, so passionate about it that I became the elections chair. And you know, now I really think that it's very, very important that we have somebody in the seat in the Secretary of State's office that is focused on building up voter confidence and restoring confidence in the process rather than tearing it down. And so that's why I've decided to run for Secretary of State.
Okay. And with January 6th, so you think that those people that were, you know, storming the Capitol in D.C., it was because of their frustration?
No, I mean, you know, whatever you think about January 6th, I know that opinions vary widely. I think we can all agree that those folks believe that the election in 2020 was stolen. And, you know, I think it's just a great illustration of what our whole country could look like if we lose voter confidence. You know, a few years ago, not many years ago, Hayes State University did a poll, found nearly half of Kansans no longer believe that the results of our election reflect the will of the voters. You know, I served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen what it looks like when people lose faith in democracy and start picking up guns to settle their problems instead of going to the ballot box. And I will do everything in my power to stop that from happening here in Kansas and in America.
Do you think they were right then to do that?
You know, I can't speak to the entire country, but our elections here in Kansas are secure, and they were secure in 2020. But again, if people don't believe they're secure, it doesn't matter how secure they are. So it's not just about you know, the technology and the methods that we use to secure our election. It's about being transparent, so that people know that our elections are secure. And where there are vulnerabilities, because, you know, elections are run by humans and there are going to be things that need to be fixed. Where there are vulnerabilities, we address them in a way that keeps it easy to vote, but assures everybody that it's hard to cheat.
Now, what's your perspective on voting in elections? You gave me a little bit of insight there, but I've heard that no early voting is something that you've been for, and no 3-day grace period. Right?
So those are two separate things. There was a video that, you know, was purported to be a leaked video that you know, of a secret meeting of legislators. In fact, it was a town hall run by the majority leader that I was invited to be the guest speaker of. And what I said in that town hall, I stand by. In a perfect world, everybody would vote on election day. In a perfect world, the only people who would mail in vote are the people that couldn't get to the polls. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live, you know, people like the convenience. I vote early because on election day I'm sort of busy. So, you know, people like that convenience, so we need to focus on how we can make it as secure as possible to vote on election day or vote early or vote by mail.
I think in the video as well, you mentioned that with having that 3-day grace period, it was disenfranchising rural voters.
Well, it's not, right. So I thought it was, at the time we didn't have the data, and I thought it was just disenfranchising rural voters. But what we heard from the Secretary of State, and I think he was on the show talking about it back in September or October, when they got the data from the election officers across the state of the primary election, 1,000 voters, their votes were not counted because they showed up during that 3-day grace period. The voter did everything right, the election officer did everything right, but the post office didn't put a little postmark on the ballot. And the law is we have to know that your ballot was cast before election night, the end of election night. And so those ballots couldn't be counted. 1,000 voters, that's 2% of all the mail-in votes cast in the primary were not counted because they showed up during the 3-day grace period without a postmark. 32 other states have already solved this problem by just making election night. They stopped taking ballots on election night, and I think we should join the nearly 2/3 of the country that do it that way.
Okay. So with that particular thought, do you think the fault was then on the post office, or was it on the mail-in ballots?
Yeah. Well, ideally, if we could fix the post office, which federal government's been trying to do for quite some time, we would just have them postmark every ballot. But there's nothing requiring them to postmark those ballots. Postmarking is for canceling a stamp. And if a ballot doesn't have a stamp, because a lot of counties don't put a stamp on their ballot, then they don't postmark the ballot. And you can ask, and I know Secretary of State Schwab did a ton of work with the Postmaster General, and they stepped up their game, and they did a little bit better in the general election than they had done in the primary when they disenfranchised 2% of mail-in voters. But I think it's simpler if we just eliminate the 3-day grace period, like 32 other states have already done, make election night the night that we stop taking ballots, and then you don't have to have a postmark, because unless somebody mailed it through a time machine, it was clearly cast before election night.
But your perspective is that election day should be election day.
Well, like I said, in a perfect world, where everybody could vote on election day, I think that, in a perfect world, we'd all vote on election day. But that's not, we don't live in that world, right? Police, fire, there are tons of people that can't vote on election day, that we can't, even if we made a national holiday, there'd be some people that had to work that day. And so early voting is not going anywhere, mail-in voting is not going anywhere. I'm not trying to eliminate either, and we need to focus on making those as secure as we can.
We'll be back with more from that interview after the break.
You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
That was funny. Yeah. That's a sick bike.
Boys.
Miss Sanderson?
See you Monday.
No way.
Shop local, dine local, and love local at Fairlawn Plaza.
Enhance your natural beauty. Keep your car sparkling, your barbecue sizzling, and your footwear refreshed. Fashion for work and play.
Dive into a new artistic pursuit.
Indoor and outdoor events that support the community.
Explore exciting new spots for meals and snacks. You'll find it all at Fairlawn Plaza.
This tax season, why not save more? At Faith Furniture, we're axing the tax. That's right, get savings equal to your sales tax. Why pay more when you can pay less? Save the tax and enjoy the savings on the furniture you love. From cozy couches to a new mattress set. Now's the time to bring home more for less. Don't wait, the clock is ticking. Come into Faith Furniture in Manhattan today and axe the tax. Hurry, these savings won't last forever.
For Brittany, it's more than a move. It's a new city. It's a new role. A brand new horizon that's hers for the taking. It's more than a move, and we're more than a truck.
Established in 2005, Sardo Countertops opened to transform houses into homes and to provide exquisite service throughout the Midwest. The result is a true masterpiece for your home.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. We have more from that exclusive interview with the new Secretary of State candidate, Pat Proctor.
And he says that boosting election integrity is a top priority.
Some of the duties of the Secretary of State include they're being responsible for administering elections, but also collecting certain records of Kansas businesses, publishing official publications for the state of Kansas. So you're potentially maintaining hundreds of thousands of documents at a time. Why should Kansans trust you in that position?
Well, that's a great question. So a big role of the Secretary of State's office is the role that it does in fostering business, right? Because when an entrepreneur wants to start a business, their first stop is to go to the Secretary of State's office and file for a incorporation or an LLC or whatever. And you know, I'm a small business owner. Me and my wife own a couple restaurants, one in Leavenworth and one in Manhattan. And I know what it's like to be starting a business. You know, we started out in 2006. We had no clue what we were doing. You know, we knew we wanted to have restaurants. And so we had to navigate that Byzantine process. And what I'd like to do is really transform that platform in the Secretary of State's office into an engine for growing the Kansas economy. I would like it to be a one-stop shop. Yes, you go to the Secretary of State's website to file for your corporation, but all the other resources that you need, you know, from the Department of Ag, if you're going to, you know, start a restaurant, you need to file with the health department or whatever. All the things that you need are there, you know, a click away. So it's kind of the center where a person goes when they want to start a business to find out all the things that they have to do at the federal, at the state, and at the local level. So yeah, I think that that's an important part of what the Secretary of State does. Everybody wants to talk about elections, but I think that's important too.
Okay. Would you say you're a more moderate or conservative candidate? And I ask this because I think partisanship has played a big role in some of these elections, or in this position particularly in the past few years, mainly when backing what some have called election conspiracies or thoughts of election fraud or anything like that. So do you believe in any of these conspiracies, quote unquote, and where would you say you lean politically?
Well, I'm a conservative Republican, and you know, I'm the first Republican reelected in my district since 1994, and I just did the three-peat, even though I'm much more conservative than my district. But I level with folks. When I'm going door to door talking to every voter, I tell them this is where I stand on the issues, and I think people appreciate that. So I don't believe every theory that's out there about what's gone on with our elections, but something that's interesting is they all start from a nugget of truth, a vulnerability in our election system, and then, you know, sometimes they kind of fill in the facts they don't know with conjecture. And so I think that there's a role for addressing the vulnerabilities in the election system, you know, again, where it doesn't make it harder to vote, but it assures people that we're making it harder to cheat. You know, drop boxes is a perfect example, right? There was a video out there called 2,000 Mules about how people were using the drop boxes in some state to steal the election. And, you know, Dinesh D'Souza, who was the narrator to that, has since come out and said, you know, I was sort of misinformed, and a lot of the stuff I said in that video weren't true. But at the nugget of that is the concern about the drop boxes. And we have an issue with drop boxes in our state. You know, there are no regulations for drop boxes. Every county sort of does what it wants to do. I've been working with the Secretary of State to try to get a bill passed that would give him the authority to regulate drop boxes, and I hope we're going to get that done. And then, you know, when it's time to work on that, we should work with the election officers, because every county is different. Every county is, you know, got its own unique challenges, and so we need to make sure we craft the regulations in a way that is voter friendly, because at the end of the day, the job of the Secretary of State and the job of all those election officers is to facilitate voters being able to vote in a simple way. And so I wouldn't say I'm like pro-conspiracy theory, I'd say I'm pro-voter and pro-election officer. And so I'm going to be working with those things in mind, just like I've worked for the last 3 years as the chair of the Elections Committee.
So you're open to hearing other perspectives and admitting or acknowledging when your perspective could change based on what you hear.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't do this. I don't do this professionally. Run elections, right? I'm the chair of the Elections Committee, and we oversee election law. But I don't every day take ballots and print ballots and count ballots. So I do everything in my power to get out to as many election officers as I can. I've been, you know, I haven't been to all of them yet, but, you know, I was just out in Hayes the other day talking to their election officer. I've been in Butler County, Wabunsee County, and then I've been to all the big counties, Sedgwick and Wyandotte and Johnson County, you know, talking to the election officers. And because everybody's situation is so unique, and as we're talking about election law, we need to make sure that we're keeping all those things in account, because I want to make it easier on the election officers, not harder.
Okay, campaign slogan?
You know, I am focused on getting things done, just like I've been focused on getting things done in the legislature. But if you've if I have to have a tagline, I'd just say restore confidence in the process.
When we come back, a look at some of the key takeaways from veto session.
And we've got political analyst Bob Beatty joining us in studio. We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Grace Med Health Clinic is your home for complete compassionate care. From medical visits to vision screenings, dental care, behavioral health support, and a fully equipped pharmacy, we're here to meet all your health needs. Our dedicated team of providers and staff work together to make every visit welcoming and stress-free. Because at Grace Med, you're not just a patient, you're part of our family. Call 785-861-8800 to schedule your appointment. Grace Med Health Clinic, compassionate care for all.
Topeka, you've spoken, and thanks to you, Devon James wins for the second year in a row. Devon James was voted Best Law Firm in the Topeka 2024 Official Community's Choice Awards, supporting the community and protecting the rights of accident victims.
Thank you, Topeka, for making Devon James your choice of law firms.
Topeka's Best Law Firm, proud to fight for the people of Topeka. If you've been injured, Devon James wins. Call 888-8888.
Briggs Auto Group, locally owned since 1979. We're proud to be your trusted dealership, standing by fair and transparent pricing with no surprise fees. Our sales professionals are trained, non-commissioned experts, focused on helping find the right vehicle and not just making a sale. Come experience our first-class care before and after the purchase. Come see us at Briggs Auto Group, where trust matters and customers are number one.
Hey, look what's going on at Briggs Auto. Briggs!
27 News is proud to be part of Northeast Kansas and the surrounding communities. We stay close to the roots of Northeast Kansas, and our team is deeply rooted in the community.
With our 27 News brand working for you, we celebrate the good happening in our community and hold the powerful accountable.
And when severe weather threatens, the 27 News Storm Track weather team is quickly online and on air to give you advance warning.
27 News, proud to be working for Northeast Kansas, working for you.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. Turning now to look at some of the key takeaways from the veto session.
Yeah, Bob Beatty is here with us now. And Bob, let's first talk about some of the stuff that we saw during this veto session, big overrides. We'll start with the tax changes that we could see coming soon because of a bill that the legislature override.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's kind of like what some people call a trigger law, and basically it means that if Kansas takes in more money than it did the year before from income taxes, they will start cutting the rate of taxes down proportionally to the money they've taken in. A little bit complicated, but if enough money comes in one year over the next, it could mean that it could go down to essentially a flat tax for everybody of about 4%. So we'll have to see how that goes, but it's almost like a backdoor tax cut, but it really depends on how the economy is doing in the state.
Very interesting. Bob, I want to get your take on the limit on county health officials. Let's go over that one.
Yeah, you know, sometimes we think COVID is over and then bills keep coming, and basically a few things, bills were passed over the governor's override. One, it's county officials will have more limits on banning public gatherings, the ability to ban those. They won't be able to do it. They can also be sued if they quarantine someone wrongfully, quotes, and so that's against counties. And in terms of the state secretary of health, they also will be limited in what they can do, and they could also be sued. So just more limits on state and county health officials. This is really a result of the COVID epidemic.
Now let's also talk about a bill that would provide child support for unborn babies.
That's right. The governor vetoed that, and it was overridden. So yes, exactly what you said. There will be child support now for unborn babies, but there's a couple other things. One is there's a tax credit for an unborn child for a woman. And another is interesting is that the grade schools in Kansas will have to show a 3-minute video of fetal development. So those are some of the abortion or related bills that actually ended up being passed over the governor's vetoes.
Bob, what about key takeaways? Looking at the session in general, anything different, unusual this time around?
Well, you know, I want to focus on something that actually happened, where the governor signed a bill and she was happy about it. There's a lot of vetoes, and one is there now is in Kansas an Office of Early Childhood. It merges 3 departments that will govern child care, and that's something the governor really wanted, and she was very pleased, I believe, to have Republicans, you know, vote, because the Republicans have the supermajority, and get that passed. So that's one positive aspect of the session, where the governor was not battling Republicans throughout the session.
Okay, we also talk about bipartisanship, looking at one of those bills that passed with, you know, strong support on both sides, blackout license plates.
That's right. Let's have some fun. You know, it's not all anger and throwing things. Blackout license plates, $50. You can get one in the state of Kansas.
All right, Bob, thank you so much. And that was your look inside Kansas politics. We'll see you next Sunday, same time, same place.
Have a wonderful day.